Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into ancient legend, a labyrinth so intricate that you might find yourself lost forever, with no hope of escape. It's the home of a creature so terrifying, half man, half bull. Almost no one survives an encounter. You might think this is just some tall tale, right? But what if I told you the origins of this labyrinth are steeped in something even more mysterious than a maze? And if you're brave enough to keep listening, you probably won't survive this. But then again, that's the thrill of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, leave a comment with your location and local time, just so I know where you're listening from on this wild journey. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine standing at the edge of a massive structure, a place of winding corridors and endless dead ends. The walls tower above you, and no one has ever returned from the center. This is the Labyrinth of Crete, home to the Minotaur, and its origins are tied to the ancient gods themselves. It wasn't just a maze for fun or an architectural challenge. It was the creation of a powerful monarch, King Minos, and a mark of divine wrath. The labyrinth, as the story goes, was designed to hold a creature born from the gods' anger, half human, half bull, with a hunger for blood. It was said that this creature could never be defeated, never contained, and no one who entered the maze would ever make it out alive. But how did it come to be? And why was the maze so intricately designed that even the greatest minds of the time would never find their way out? These questions go back to Minos, a king caught in a divine struggle that would shape the fate of not just his kingdom, but the entire ancient world. Historians still argue whether the labyrinth was based on a real structure or if it was purely mythological. Some suggest it could have been inspired by the Grand Palace of Knossos, a sprawling, labyrinthine complex with its own series of twisting hallways. But whether the maze was real or imagined, its legacy is undeniable, rooted in tragedy, divine power, and a monstrous beast that haunted the very heart of Crete. The story of the Minotaur doesn't start with a monster or a maze, but with a king. King Minos of Crete was a ruler known not just for his wealth and power, but for his unshakable belief that he had the favor of the gods. His kingdom was a paradise, a center of culture, and a naval empire unrivaled in the Mediterranean. But like all great rulers, Minos had one small problem. He wasn't the only one vying for divine approval. The gods, especially Zeus, had a hand in many of the events that unfolded. Zeus, always fond of mortal affairs, took a particular interest in Minos when the king's father, King Aeacus, died. Minos had been promised the throne by the gods, but he needed to prove his legitimacy. To do so, he prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, asking for a sign to demonstrate his rightful rule. Poseidon, ever the trickster, granted Minos his wish in the form of a magnificent white bull, a symbol of strength and divine favor. But Minos, ever the ambitious king, had no intention of sacrificing this magnificent bull. The animal was too perfect, too valuable. Instead, he offered Poseidon a different, lesser creature as a token of thanks, believing the god would not notice the deceit. Big mistake. Poseidon, enraged by Minos' hubris, cursed him. The beautiful white bull, which should have been sacrificed to honor the god, would forever remain untamed. Worse still, Poseidon made sure that Minos' wife, Pasiphae, would fall madly in love with the bull. Historians still argue whether this divine punishment was meant as a cruel jest or a devastating act of revenge. But one thing is certain: the god's wrath was not to be trifled with. And for Pasiphae, this divine love affair would lead to the birth of the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature who would forever haunt the labyrinth's depths. So, in the end, the divine favor Minos sought so desperately turned into a curse, a twisted tale of ambition, divine anger, and love gone terribly wrong. And with it came the creation of the very labyrinth meant to contain the abomination born of this curse. Let's talk about Daedalus, the man who brought the labyrinth to life. You've probably heard the name, but do you know how his ingenuity intertwined with the fates of gods, kings, and monsters? Daedalus wasn't just a humble architect. He was a genius, a craftsman with skills so legendary that his name became synonymous with invention and creativity. But like many brilliant minds in ancient myths, Daedalus's talents would eventually lead him down a dark path. He wasn't the first to be summoned to Crete. In fact, Minos had a rather practical need. The labyrinth, an ever-expanding maze designed to contain the monstrous Minotaur, was no simple structure. It needed to be constructed with such complexity that no man could navigate it. Minos, perhaps sensing that Daedalus could solve this riddle, summoned him from Athens to design the structure. It's said that Daedalus, the mastermind behind the labyrinth's twisting corridors and treacherous paths, used a combination of labyrinthine geometry and his knowledge of the natural world to build a structure that was as confusing as it was magnificent. The design was so complex that even Daedalus himself would later regret creating it, for it was said that once you entered, there was no way to escape without help. The very act of creating the labyrinth was an artistic triumph, but also a testament to the dangers of a mind so consumed by its own designs. But Daedalus wasn't just a craftsman. He was also a tragic figure, one whose brilliance came at a personal cost. Historians still argue whether Daedalus built the labyrinth willingly or whether Minos coerced him with threats of imprisonment. Some accounts suggest that Daedalus tried to warn Minos about the labyrinth's potential danger, but the king, blinded by his ambition, ignored his counsel. As the labyrinth was completed, Daedalus realized the horror he had helped create. The Minotaur would now be trapped, imprisoned forever in its maze. But it wasn't just the beast that needed to be contained. Daedalus, too, would find himself ensnared by his own creation. The Minotaur's birth is a dark chapter in this tangled tale, one that casts a shadow over Crete's royal family and adds an even darker twist to King Minos' saga. We've already seen how Minos, cursed by Poseidon, created the perfect storm for a tragedy, but the true horror came when his wife, Pasiphae, gave birth to a creature that was neither human nor beast, but a horrifying blend of both, a monstrous offspring of divine punishment. After falling prey to Poseidon's curse, Pasiphae found herself inexplicably in love with the bull. This wasn't a simple affection. It was an uncontrollable passion, one that no mortal could resist. The gods had ensured that Pasiphae's mind and heart would be overtaken by desire for the beast. Desperate to fulfill her obsession, she enlisted the help of Daedalus, who, ever the craftsman, devised a way for Pasiphae to mate with the bull. He created a hollow wooden cow, a cunning contraption that allowed her to hide inside and, in a twisted sense, be with the creature. Historians still debate the motivations behind Pasiphae's actions. Some claim it was merely a tragic consequence of the gods' intervention, while others argue that it speaks to deeper themes of divine retribution and human vulnerability. Was it merely a symptom of Poseidon's curse, or did Pasiphae's own desires play a role in this grotesque union? Whatever the cause, the result was a monstrosity. The Minotaur, a half-bull, half-human creature whose very existence was a grotesque reflection of divine wrath. The Minotaur was confined to the labyrinth, a place so complex and treacherous that no one, not even Daedalus himself, could navigate it without help. The beast was a constant reminder of Minos' defiance of the gods, a creature born of shame, divine vengeance, and tragedy. The birth of the Minotaur was, in many ways, the birth of the labyrinth itself. The beast's insatiable hunger, its violent tendencies, and its place in the maze were a result of the gods' unyielding punishment. And while the labyrinth might have been designed to contain the monster, it was also a prison for Minos, Daedalus, and the whole island of Crete, whose fate was sealed the moment Pasiphae's strange desires gave birth to the creature. Enter Theseus, the hero who would forever change the fate of the Minotaur, and with it, the course of Greek myth. Theseus wasn't just any hero. He was a man marked for greatness, a prince of Athens with the ambition and courage to match his bloodline. But his journey to the labyrinth wasn't just about heroism, it was about proving himself, about stepping out from the shadow of his legendary father, Aegeus. And like any good hero in a Greek myth, Theseus was headed straight for danger. The myth of Theseus and the Minotaur is one of the most enduring stories in Greek mythology. When Athens found itself under the cruel tribute of King Minos, forced to send young men and women into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur, Theseus knew something had to change. This annual sacrifice was a mark of shame for Athens, a dark reminder of their powerlessness. Determined to end it once and for all, Theseus volunteered to be sent into the labyrinth, prepared to face the beast head on and rid the world of this monstrous creation. Historians still debate whether Theseus's motivations were entirely altruistic or if he was simply seeking glory. Some see his actions as an act of true heroism, while others argue that Theseus's desire for fame and recognition may have driven him to face the Minotaur in the first place. Was it about saving the Athenians from the terrible tribute, or was it about Theseus proving himself a worthy successor to his father's legacy? We'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. He wasn't going into that maze unprepared. Theseus had an ally in Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, who saw in him a chance for escape and redemption. She fell in love with him almost immediately, offering him the one thing that would ensure his survival, a ball of thread. With this simple gift, Theseus could mark his path through the maze, unwinding the thread as he ventured deeper into the labyrinth. It was a small thing, but as we'll see, it would prove essential in his quest. The concept of the thread isn't just a practical tool. It's a powerful symbol in Greek mythology. The thread represents guidance, fate, and the fine line between life and death. Without it, Theseus would have been lost, just like everyone else who ventured into the labyrinth before him. In a way, Ariadne's thread was the difference between survival and a dark, eternal end. Another twist in this complex web of gods, monsters, and fate. Theseus's descent into the labyrinth was more than just a physical journey. It was a symbolic one. Armed with the thread from Ariadne, he ventured deep into the heart of Crete's dark maze, each step carrying him closer to the Minotaur and further away from safety. The labyrinthine corridors were a representation of the human psyche, endless twists, dead ends, and a maze of emotions that mirrored Theseus's internal conflict. Was he brave enough to face what lay ahead? Or was he driven by the pull of fate, tied to a destiny he could not escape? Historians still debate whether the use of the thread was a simple solution or a more profound metaphysical symbol. Some view it as a literal lifeline, a piece of hope in an otherwise hopeless journey. Others argue that it represents something much more complex. Perhaps the thread is a metaphor for human agency, a way to navigate through the chaos of life. Whether it was simply a practical tool or a divine intervention, it was clear that the thread was a lifeline, allowing Theseus to navigate the maze and find his way to the Minotaur's lair. As Theseus ventured deeper, the labyrinth's twisted corridors seemed to grow more oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in on him. The silence in the maze was palpable, broken only by the distant sound of his own heartbeat. Yet, despite the danger surrounding him, Theseus pushed forward, his grip on the thread tightening as he approached the Minotaur's den. The Minotaur, lurking in the shadows, was more than just a creature. It was a manifestation of everything Theseus had come to confront: fear, fate, and the consequences of human ambition. The moment Theseus finally encountered the Minotaur was a dramatic clash of opposites. The Minotaur, a creature of brutal strength and primal fury, stood before Theseus as the embodiment of all the rage and violence that had been trapped within the labyrinth for years. But Theseus wasn't afraid. Armed with nothing but his sword and the thread of Ariadne, he faced the beast head on, and in a battle that was as much about willpower as it was about skill, Theseus triumphed. The fight was brutal, and the Minotaur, though powerful, was no match for Theseus's determination. With a single decisive blow, the hero struck down the monster. The labyrinth, once a place of fear and suffering, had finally been overcome. Theseus, victorious, stood over the creature's fallen body, the echoes of his triumph reverberating through the maze. He had not only slain the beast, but also overcome the maze itself, proving that no monster, real or symbolic, could keep him trapped forever. But as victorious as Theseus was, the story didn't end there. The real test lay ahead: escaping the labyrinth. The battle with the Minotaur was only one part of the ordeal. Theseus, now victorious, still had to escape the labyrinth. And as we've seen, getting in was one thing, but getting out was another matter entirely. The winding corridors, which seemed to twist endlessly into infinity, now felt like they were closing in on him, an ominous reminder that even the most heroic triumph could lead to its own kind of doom. The thread, which had served as a lifeline before, now seemed like the only connection to the world beyond. But even with it, there were no guarantees. Historians still debate whether the labyrinth was a true physical maze, or if it symbolized something deeper, perhaps the confusion of human experience itself. One thing is certain, though: even after the Minotaur's death, Theseus's path out wasn't any clearer than the moment he first entered. The real test was now ahead of him. Could he find his way out, or would he too become another lost soul, forever wandering in the shadows of the maze? But with the Minotaur slain, the labyrinth, in a way, had already lost its power. Theseus, aided by the thread, could retrace his steps, his thread now a symbol of his journey from hopelessness to triumph. However, there were still dangers lurking ahead. The story of Theseus's escape wasn't as smooth as we might expect. It wasn't about simple victory. After all, the gods had a way of complicating things. While Theseus was deep inside the labyrinth, another part of the myth was playing out, the unfolding drama of Ariadne, who had given him the thread and risked her own safety for him. When Theseus finally emerged from the maze, victorious and alive, he had promised to take her with him back to Athens. But fate, as it often does in Greek myths, had other plans. Theseus, caught up in the euphoria of his victory, forgot his promise to Ariadne. He abandoned her on the island of Naxos. This twist, although heartbreaking, served as a reminder that even heroes are flawed, and their quests rarely come without personal cost. Historians still argue whether Theseus's abandonment of Ariadne was a tragic mistake or a necessary part of his journey toward realizing his destiny. Regardless, it's clear that in choosing victory over love, Theseus set himself up for future regret, and in a cruel irony, Ariadne herself would later find love with the god Dionysus, while Theseus would face many more trials ahead. The labyrinth had taken much from Theseus already, and yet the most significant consequence of his actions wasn't just the death of the Minotaur. It was the way the journey had changed him. The hero who had once been driven by a desire for fame and glory was now marked by a deeper understanding of loss, regret, and the complexities of human choices. His escape from the labyrinth was not just a physical triumph. It was a metamorphosis, one that would shape the rest of his life. The legacy of the labyrinth didn't end with the Minotaur's death or Theseus's escape. In fact, the story of the labyrinth and its monstrous inhabitant only grew more complex as time passed. Historians, both ancient and modern, have long debated whether the labyrinth itself was ever a physical structure, or whether it was a metaphor for something deeper, perhaps an allegory for human struggle, or an abstract representation of fate. While some believe it was based on the real palace of Knossos in Crete, with its confusing layout of halls and rooms, others argue that the labyrinth was purely a mythical construct, a place designed to evoke the emotional chaos of human existence. The reality, though, is that we may never know. Archaeological evidence suggests that the ruins of Knossos do indeed echo some of the descriptions of the labyrinth, vast, sprawling, and full of passageways. But the idea that such a maze could house a creature as unnatural as the Minotaur is something historians are still unsure about. Was the labyrinth meant to be taken literally? Or was it a grand myth designed to convey the consequences of divine retribution and human pride? What we do know is that the labyrinth and the Minotaur became symbols far beyond their immediate narrative. They represent a clash between human ambition and the divine, the struggle to control forces larger than oneself. The Minotaur, as a monstrous offspring of gods, is emblematic of humanity's perpetual conflict with fate, an entity that cannot be controlled or understood, only confronted. The labyrinth, likewise, serves as a reminder of the complexity of existence itself, how we can find ourselves lost in situations and emotions with no easy way out. Beyond the structure's physicality, the labyrinth served as a powerful symbol in Greek culture and literature, one that would echo through centuries. The very idea of a maze, an intricate puzzle, or a series of choices leading to an uncertain conclusion, spoke to the Greeks' understanding of life as a journey, where every decision had consequences, and every path led to its own set of challenges. The Minotaur, trapped within this complex network of corridors, was a reflection of the tensions and contradictions of existence. As we fast forward through history, the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth continue to be referenced in art, literature, and even modern popular culture. Its significance didn't diminish as time passed. It only deepened. From the plays of ancient Greece to the surrealist works of the 20th century, the idea of a hero facing an insurmountable challenge in a maze-like environment remains a powerful narrative tool. Whether in books, movies, or video games, we see echoes of the Minotaur's labyrinthine world. But the question remains, was the labyrinth merely a structure built by Daedalus, or was it a reflection of something more universal, a way for the ancient Greeks to explain the complexities of their own lives? Historians still argue whether the maze itself was ever meant to be real, or if it was simply a symbol of how we all struggle to find our way through a world full of mysteries. The myth of the Minotaur, as well as the labyrinth that contained him, has transcended its original context, becoming a metaphor for the trials and tribulations of life itself, forever etched into the collective consciousness. The fall of Minos' dynasty is a grim reminder of how the gods often play a long game with the fates of mortals. After Theseus' triumph over the Minotaur, things did not magically improve for Crete or its king. While Minos had once been a mighty ruler, his hubris and the tragic consequences of his actions caught up with him. His downfall began not with the death of the Minotaur, but with the consequences of his relationship with the gods. And the Minotaur was only one part of his karmic retribution. Minos had been a proud king, one who believed that the favor of the gods could shield him from the consequences of his actions. But the gods, as we know, are not easily pleased. After his son, Androgeus, was killed in Athens under mysterious circumstances, Minos demanded vengeance from Athens. The city, under duress, was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete as a tribute to be fed to the Minotaur every year. This tribute, one of the darkest aspects of Minos' reign, was meant to be a form of penance, but also a way for the king to reassert his dominance. However, it was a brutal and unsustainable policy, one that eventually set the stage for Minos' ruin. Historians still debate whether Minos' dynasty was truly brought to an end by the gods, or if it was merely the result of his inability to maintain the power he had so ruthlessly claimed. But whatever the cause, Minos' reign, and with it the power of Crete, began to crumble after Theseus' escape from the Labyrinth. The very thing that had once been a symbol of his might, the Labyrinth, had been overcome, and the king who had relied on divine favor was left to face his own mortality. The divine punishment that had started with Poseidon's wrath and continued with the birth of the Minotaur culminated in the slow unraveling of his empire. But the gods did not end his rule immediately. Instead, Minos' own pride and sense of invincibility led him into further conflict. As legend tells it, Minos eventually tried to prove his worthiness once again by taking a journey to Sicily, where he hoped to assert his power. Unfortunately, he met his end at the hands of King Cocalus of Sicily, who, while feigning hospitality, secretly murdered him in a bath. The tragic irony of Minos' end is that his fate had been sealed long before his death. His hubris, his belief that he was untouchable, had ultimately led him to the very fate that he had sought to avoid, a brutal and unceremonious end. The fall of Minos, his dynasty, and the end of the Labyrinth's reign as a symbol of his power marks the final chapter in the myth's darker themes of divine retribution. Though Minos had ruled a powerful kingdom, he could not escape the consequences of his earlier actions. His downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the consequences of challenging the gods. Even the most powerful kings must eventually fall, and their legacies, like the labyrinth itself, are subject to the whims of fate. The story of the Minotaur and the labyrinth, in many ways, mirrors the rise and fall of Crete. It began with ambition and the pursuit of power, but it ended in tragedy and ruin. In the end, Minos' fate was inescapable, woven into the very fabric of the myth, a reminder that even the greatest empires are no match for the divine forces at play in the world. Even after the fall of Minos, the legacy of the Labyrinth and the Minotaur continue to cast a long shadow across culture, art, and thought. The tale of the Minotaur is far from over, for it lives on in the echoes of our modern world, its influence still tangible across centuries. It serves not just as a myth, but as a powerful symbol, one that transcends its ancient origins, remaining relevant to this day. The Minotaur, though long dead, continues to haunt the collective imagination. In modern culture, the creature has evolved into a complex symbol. It represents the darkness that lies within all of us, the beast we must confront, whether it be our own fears, desires, or flaws. The image of the half-man, half-bull, trapped in a labyrinth, is a reminder that each of us have our own maze to navigate. The Minotaur's strength, rage, and confusion resonate with those who feel trapped by the complexities of life, unable to find a way out. Throughout literature, the Minotaur symbolism has endured. In works from the ancient world to modern novels, films, and art, the creature's struggle is used to convey themes of isolation, identity, and the search for meaning. From surrealist art to contemporary fantasy, the figure of the Minotaur, in all its twisted, tragic form, serves as a powerful metaphor for the human condition, one that is constantly in flux, never fully able to escape its labyrinth. Historians still argue about the exact impact of the myth on later generations, but it is undeniable that the labyrinth has become much more than just a story of gods and monsters. In the Renaissance, for example, artists and thinkers like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, fascinated by the complexities of human anatomy and psychology, often invoked the Minotaur as a symbol of the darker side of human nature. The story evolved in ways that took it far beyond the confines of ancient Greece. But it's not just high art where we find traces of the labyrinth. The influence of the myth extends into modern storytelling too. Films, video games, and novels, from Pan's Labyrinth to the Percy Jackson series, are filled with echoes of the Minotaur and its maze. In fact, the idea of a labyrinth, a confusing, seemingly inescapable puzzle, remains one of the most popular narrative devices in fantasy and adventure stories today. The Minotaur's myth has become part of our cultural DNA, serving as a backdrop for countless quests, from the simplest to the most profound. But even as the Minotaur's tale endures, we must remember the essential truth at the heart of the myth. The maze and the monster are never truly defeated. The labyrinth always exists in one form or another, And the Minotaur, in the dark recesses of our minds, waits for us to confront it. The journey to find the monster is never fully over. Whether that monster is a literal creature or the darker sides of ourselves waiting to be confronted. And so, as the story of the labyrinth comes to its end, it isn't a simple conclusion. It's a reminder that the journey itself, the search for understanding and meaning, is perpetual. There will always be new labyrinths to explore, new monsters to face. But perhaps, like Theseus, we will learn to navigate the twists and turns, finding our way out when the path seems impossible. Now, as you close your eyes, let this myth settle into the quiet recesses of your mind. The labyrinth may be gone, but it's never truly left. In every twist and turn of your own life, there may be a Minotaur waiting for you. And with each step, remember, it's not the monster that defines us, but how we face it